everybody. It is Monday, September 23rd. You're listening to the mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to.
Long weekend, Moshe?
Jill, it was the first birthday for our firstborn. So a lot of festivities. Family came from out of town. My family came in from Texas and from Chicago. So a very exciting weekend. A very happy birthday to my daughter, Olivia. We will play this podcast for her when she can understand and comprehend these words. But you have changed my life. The fatherhood is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I cannot imagine life without her. And the weather cooperated. It was just a lovely weekend. And of course, I'm very thankful to her mother and constantly impressed. The word's not impressed. Floored by just how incredible Alex is as a mom. And so one of the first things we did this morning, Olivia and I went out early. We actually had to lay claim to a park area in New York City so we could have our party there later in the day. So we went to go put paper down and balloons and stuff so no one would claim our park benches. And then we went to get flowers for Al, to thank her for Olivia's literal birthday.
Well, that is very nice because the mother usually is the first person forgotten on these birthdays and usually the person organizing everything. So that's great. Well, a very happy birthday to Olivia. One is a huge milestone. It really is. That's like the big one. And I'm with you, Alex. I'm not surprised at all that she's, such an incredible mother. And I'm happy that you are enjoying your parenthood journey so far.
I love it. I love it. I am trying to cherish every moment of it. She's already, officially a year, like climbing up on me, like at the verge of walking. And I'm like, I'm going to just cherish these, however long it is until she can walk. And as we go through all those steps, Jill, as you said, like one is the big one. And then immediately I was like, it's not when she's 16 and has a driver's license. Like, I feel like that's a big one too.
And Moshe, it was a beautiful weather weekend, as you pointed out as well. The first full day of fall was Sunday. So we are officially now in autumn, in fall season. And let's get to some news, starting with politics. With less than 50 days until Election Day and early voting already underway, there are some new threats to election workers and extreme measures in place to keep them safe. Plus, the latest polling on the presidential race shows that Kamala Harris is pulling ahead of Donald Trump. We'll take a look at the numbers. And the Secret Service is out with its own report on what went wrong the day of the Trump assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. To the Middle East, a week of heavy fighting between Israel and Hezbollah, where things stand as the region inches closer to all-out war. And here in the U.S., more shelter beds and a crackdown on tents mean that fewer homeless encampments are in San Francisco.
Fewer encampments, but not fewer homeless. We'll explain what's going on.
And as I mentioned, we are officially in fall, but forecasters say that fall will feel more like summer for millions of Americans. Cards Against Humanity suing Elon Musk's SpaceX over alleged trespassing in Texas. What that's about.
Read that a couple times and try to explain that to yourself from 10 years ago. What?
And the creator of West Wing says that he is now inspired to create a reboot after a visit to the White House Friday. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Dun, 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 dun. I loved West Wing, Jill. That's why we had to put it in the podcast today.
Least surprising news of the year.
Meanwhile, on this day in history, Jill, it is a huge day for musician birthdays, including your fave.
It could be Billy Joel. It could be Bruce Springsteen. It could be someone from this generation. We'll see. All right, to the news. Before we get to the latest in the election with just about 6 weeks to go, we do want to start with an increasingly concerning situation facing election workers. The last presidential election in 2020 ushered in a new wave of harassment against election workers and polling stations, fueled by a distrust of the voting process. Election offices, especially in the battleground counties, faced violence and even death threats over fears of voter fraud and rigged machines. And now, amid another bitterly competitive election this year, there are security concerns that are a top concern at polling booths, where election officials are implementing the utmost safety precautions as political violence becomes more volatile. So this year, local election directors are ramping up security measures to keep workers and polling places safe, while also ensuring that ballots are going to be counted accurately and that the voting systems won't be tampered with. You might actually see sheriff's deputies deployed alongside election workers, panic buttons that connect poll managers to a 911 dispatcher, masks and gloves to handle incoming mail, and even Narcan on hand in the event of exposure to a deadly opioid like fentanyl. So I'll give you some specific precautions taken around the country. In Washoe County, Nevada, election workers are protected by glass observation booths. In Maricopa County in Arizona, election workers will be working behind bulletproof glass and multiple layers of doors. All across Georgia, election workers are practicing how to handle ransomware attacks. And in Pennsylvania, election officials are considering panic buttons for poll managers. A survey of election officials underscores this new lens through which election officials view their jobs. Nearly 40% say that they've experienced threats, harassment, or abuse. 54% say they're concerned about their colleagues, and 62% fear political leaders are going to try to interfere with how election officials do their jobs. And this crackdown on security comes in the aftermath of 2020, where you saw Donald Trump supporters question the results, call the voting system corrupt, and harass poll workers.
Yeah, and you even saw people like Rudy Giuliani and others taken to court over those types of actions. Jill, you mentioned Maricopa County in Arizona. When the ballot counting begins inside their tabulation center this November, election workers, as you mentioned, will be behind multiple doors, windows with bulletproof glass, 2 layers of fencing. Security cameras will be monitoring for suspicious activity inside and outside the building, and a fleet of police drones and rooftop snipers will be at the ready. That is how seriously they're taking things right now. In many ways, the county's election headquarters has been transformed into a fortress. That's where a member of the County Board of Supervisors there in Arizona, we mentioned Maricopa County because it is a key county that could determine the fate of the election in Arizona and potentially the entire country. A member of the Board of Supervisors there is a guy by the name of Bill Gates. Not that Bill Gates. Bill Gates of Arizona. He has received multiple death threats for rejecting bogus claims last go around that Democrats were stealing the election in 2020, also in the midterms in 2022. And so he says these new safety measures are just a reflection of the reality of elections these days. The cybersecurity challenges, the physical challenges, dealing with a lot of inaccurate information about election processes, procedures, trying to educate the public about those things, because then things will go viral on social media and they'll be inundated with lawsuits and potentially protests, potentially violence outside in a number of cases due to misinformation. Many offices that have sought new protections for opening mail-in ballots after election offices. Many offices across the country now have sought new protections for opening mail-in ballots after election offices in California, Georgia, Nevada, Oregon, Texas, and Washington all received suspicious envelopes, some laced with fentanyl, last November. This past week, there was another round of suspicious packages that were reported to the FBI and the Postal Service by officials in at least 20 states. That includes Arizona again, Georgia, and North Carolina. At least a few of the envelopes had a return address to Tacoma Park, Maryland, and claimed to be from a group called United States Traitor Elimination Army. So a lot of concern here. And one of the concerns about all the security is how much it's going to cost. We're literally talking about potentially tens of billions of dollars that this is going to cost to ensure that poll workers, election workers, feel safe and are safe on election day. One election official out of Colorado who's speaking out, Josh Ziegelbaum, he's out of Adams County, Colorado, had this quote: "It's ridiculous because the people who are truly running elections are our neighbors. You see them at the grocery store, at church, at synagogue, at mosque, and they're just trying to do their job here." Jill, in speaking with some federal law enforcement officials, this is something they're taking very seriously, especially at a time here where we've been talking about multiple assassination attempts, right? That political violence is now top of mind, and frankly viewed as acceptable by way too many Americans. I think some polling is upwards of 20%. 1 out of 5 Americans is like, yeah, for my viewpoint, like violence is okay if we need to get things across in my direction. And so that is, among other things, creating fear for the people who volunteer on election day and try to help our democracy function.
Okay, now to the latest in the campaign as we get some new polling over the weekend. There is a new national NBC News poll. It shows a double-digit increase in popularity, rising Democratic enthusiasm, and an early edge for representing, quote, change that has vaulted Vice President Kamala Harris forward and reshuffled the 2024 presidential contest. With just over 6 weeks until Election Day, the poll finds Harris with a 5-point lead over former President Trump among registered voters, 49 to 44%. And while that result is within the margin of error, meaning we're still statistically looking at a tie, it is a clear shift from their last poll in July. That's when Trump was ahead by 2 points before President Biden's exit.
So a 7-point shift there from +2 Trump to -5 Trump over the course of the past 8 weeks.
Right. And I think it's really important to look at trend lines because we're always talking about whether or not these pollsters are really able to capture the entire electorate. And so when you just look at least at the way it's trending, even if you think, okay, we're not necessarily getting a representative sample of Gen Z, or we're not necessarily getting a representative sample of Trump voters, it's still trend. You're getting the same sample in all of those. Yes, yeah. in all of those polls. The transformation in the presidential contest is going well beyond the horse race. So this includes Harris's favorability. That's jumped 16 points since July, the largest increase for any politician in NBC News polling since then President George W. Bush's standing surged after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. She saw huge shifts among Black voters, Hispanic voters, independents, and young people from Biden. So this poll shows that Democrats and liberal independents are really coming home to Harris after being uncertain about Biden. And it's notable when looking at all the major people in the race, both Democrats now show that voters have more positive feelings about them than negatives, with 48 to 45 for Harris, and 40% positive and 33% negative for Tim Walz.
Yeah, so they're both above water there. More Americans like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz than dislike them. On the other side, when you look at the polling, Trump and J.D. Vance are both, the term is underwater. 40% positive for Trump, 53% negative when you talk to all voters. J.D. Vance, the least popular of anybody when you go through both tickets, he's only 32% positive, 45% negative. So that's significant, Jill, because when you look at the past couple elections, in particular 2016 was an election where Hillary Clinton and Trump were both disliked by more people than liked. So if Kamala Harris if this tracks in other polls, has more people who like her than dislike her going up against Trump, historically, that portends well for the person who's viewed positively by the majority of Americans. That said, a lot of numbers here that we should go through. In head-to-head questions, Harris holds the advantage over Trump on being seen as competent and effective, as well as having the mental and physical health to be president. That's a reversal. Trump led Biden when it came to competent and effective, as well as on mental and physical health. So you see a direction change there. When asked about issues, though, Trump still holds the advantage here when it comes to the economy and inflation and immigration. Those continue to be the top issues for voters, which is why there are people in Trump world trying to tell him, stick to the issues, especially since you win on those issues. 2/3 of voters say their family income is falling behind the cost of living. Voters rank the cost of living as the top concern in this election. The good news for Trump here is, though, that the poll shows that some of his erosion in his support comes from Republicans who aren't diehard supporters, but who would come back home to him like they did in 2016, like they did in 2020. So basically, where you're seeing a slight downtick for Trump, these are among people who have voted for him in the past, are unsure about him this time. They've gone a bit squishy, but they have 6 weeks to come back to him unless Kamala Harris makes a more compelling case. Speaking of which, 71%, 7 out of 10 American voters say their minds are now made up. 11%, 1 out of 10 Americans, say they can still change their vote between one or the other. That is a shift from April, back during the Trump-Biden race back in the spring, when 26% said they could still change their mind, when we were dealing with what we call the double haters. They hated both of them. Now we're down to about 10% of Americans who fall into that category. Jill, a lot of interesting numbers when it comes to who wins what issues. Character stuff falls to Harris. Issues, at least the top issues for a number of voters, falls to Trump. But then when it comes to issues like abortion and some of the and healthcare, those tend to go back to Harris. So it really depends on the voters here. One thing we've been talking about on this podcast, by the way, to wrap up this politics segment, will there be another debate over the weekend? Kamala Harris accepted an invitation from CNN. They say, we'll have a debate between you guys on October 23rd. That is just about 2 weeks before the election. Trump responded over the weekend to Harris saying, let's do CNN with, I'd love to, but it's too late. So it's not clear that we will see another debate this cycle, at least not as of right now, per Trump.
Now to the latest on the state of the Secret Service in the aftermath of 2 assassination attempts on former President Trump in just a matter of months. The agency released an initial internal review identifying a number of security failures that resulted in that first attempted assassination on Trump. The 5-page report lays bare the widespread failures that allowed a man with a gun to get less than 150 yards from Donald Trump at his July 13th rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, clear communications breakdowns with local law enforcement, and negligence in securing line of sight vulnerabilities. Those were among a litany of mistakes that the U.S. Secret Service acting director Ronald Rowe called complacency among agents. He described a lack of follow through in controlling the building. Multiple law enforcement entities questioned the effectiveness of having a local tactical team stationed on the second floor of the building in the complex from which Crooks fired. The team operating the second floor had no contact with the Secret Service. However, there was no follow-up discussion about changing it, according to the report. And there was no discussion with the Secret Service about putting a team on the roof, even though snipers from local law enforcement agencies were apparently not opposed to that location. The interim report suggested complacency, again, that word, by some of its agents.
Yes, we've discussed a few of the issues they brought up in this interim report, Jill. We're waiting for a longer report. We posted the 5-page report over on the Instagram account on Friday. One of the major issues we've discussed before, they were on different radio frequencies. One was on channel 1, one was on channel 2. So locals were not talking to the Secret Service. Secret Service was communicating via text message. It just was a mess of a situation, especially when it came to the fact that local law enforcement were tracking a suspicious person with a gun. And members of Trump's protection team were not on the same radio channel to be able to hear that, which means they could have easily held him back until that person was identified from going on stage. Remember, the assassination attempt there in Butler and the shooting happens just about a few minutes into the rally. Now, one of the big questions being asked here is as far as accountability. Who's losing their job over all of this? Remember, the existing Secret Service director had to resign over this. The person we're speaking to today is the acting director of the Secret Service. He says he has not yet asked any agents to retire, and they say they're not going to defer the responsibilities to others, that the agency is moving into the accountability phase of the review. This is a failure on the part of this U.S. Secret Service, the acting director says, and we need to hold ourselves accountable to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. The agency says disciplinary actions will be taken for agents involved. We're learning now, 24 hours after the assassination attempt, that the acting director met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, insisted that significant security adjustments would have to be made for him to continue golfing, that they're having difficulties defending him and protecting him on the golf course. Among the things the Secret Service has on the golf course, they have their own golf carts with guns attached, sniper rifles attached, rolling behind him, rolling ahead of him, the holes behind him, the holes ahead of him. The issue with the Trump golf courses is many of them are open spaces. In some areas, they're next to public roads. And so it's apparently taking a toll here on the Secret Service to be able to protect him there. That said, they say they are giving him the same protection as a sitting president at this point. And Jill, it came as over in the House late last week. The House unanimously, Democrats and Republicans, passed a bill that boosts Secret Service protection for presidential nominees and their running mates. It passed 405 to 0. The legislation now requires the U.S. Secret Service director to apply the same standards when determining the number of agents who protect the two candidates as they would the current president and vice president. So it appears they've already done that for Trump here, but that was one of the things going into the summer, is that Trump was getting a former president and nominees detail and not a sitting president's detail. But now, given all the threats and what has unfolded that has changed.
Time for the speed read from Reuters. There are mounting concerns about an all-out regional war in the Middle East. Hezbollah and Israel exchanged heavy fire into Sunday as the Lebanese terror group sent rockets deep into Israeli territory after facing some of the most intense bombardment in almost a year of conflict. So this conflict sharply escalated over the past week, but it has really raged since the Iran-backed group Hezbollah opened a second front against Israel following last October's Hamas terror attack, saying that it was acting in solidarity with Hamas facing an Israeli offensive in Gaza. Israel, though, will note that Hezbollah started to fire rockets on October 8th before Israel even launched a response in Gaza. On Tuesday and Wednesday, thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies used by Hezbollah members exploded in an attack widely blamed on Israel, but which it has not confirmed or denied responsibility for. The next day, Israel launched its heaviest bombardment of Lebanon yet. Friday saw Hezbollah's senior commander and founder of the elite Radwan forces, Ibrahim Akil, killed along with several other senior Hezbollah military figures in a strike on Beirut's southern suburb. Akil was also wanted for the murder of several hundred Americans over the past few decades. The U.S. actually had a $7 million reward out for his capture. The fighting escalated over the weekend. Saturday again saw unprecedented bombardment that the Israeli military said struck around 290 targets, including thousands of Hezbollah rocket launcher barrels. Hezbollah returned missiles across northern Israel. Israel was able to intercept almost all of them.
The Israeli defense minister said operations will continue until they can safely return about 100,000 Israelis on the Israeli side of the border to their homes and businesses after a year. They've all had to abandon their homes over the last year as Hezbollah has been firing rockets and drones, etc., into Israel. The stage is now set here for what could be a prolonged fight, and as you noted, concerns about even further escalation here, because Hezbollah is vowing not to back down here. Now, the head of the Israeli Defense Forces, Herzi Halevi, said this weekend that the plan for the Israelis is to return the residents to the homes. The plan is to safely return residents to their homes. And if Hezbollah has not understood this yet, it will get another blow and another blow and another blow until they understand. Now, killing Akil and senior leadership on Friday was a big deal. The Israelis said they got him. Hezbollah wouldn't confirm it. Hezbollah finally confirmed it later in the weekend. They've taken out a number of senior Hezbollah leaders over the course of the past couple of weeks here. Akil was responsible, as you noted, Jill, for killing hundreds of Americans and Israelis over the decades, including several hundred U.S. Marines in the Hezbollah attack there in the 80s in Lebanon. And it's notable how they got him, Jill. So Israel, as we've talked about, reportedly, created the pagers and the walkie-talkies, got them into the hands of Hamas, blew them up last week. They then followed everyone who went into the hospitals in Lebanon and tracked everyone who was being released from the hospitals. That included Akil. So apparently, as they were monitoring checkout with drones and whatever they were using to monitor them, they monitored him and were able to track him, the senior leader, out of the hospital after presumably his pager or walkie-talkie had exploded, and then tracked him back to a building where he was then meeting with other top Hezbollah commanders in an apartment building, and then they took them out. Apparently, they were monitoring it so closely, Israel says that they were actually listening in, and they were figuring out Hezbollah's equivalent of October 7th, looking for a plan to infiltrate inside Israel, murder civilians, kidnap, etc. And so we got to see what's going to happen here. Certainly has a lot of folks in the U.S. government on high alert here. People have said, listen, they have no love lost for Akil. Frankly, there was millions of dollars out for his arrest, for his capture. But ultimately, they're concerned about the tactics here and the timing, at least when you talk to certain U.S. officials. Others, not as worried. Ultimately, when it comes to Hezbollah, they take the direction from Iran. Iran is presumably, understandably, doesn't want an all-out war at the moment, but no one else does. Lebanon doesn't want an all-out war. Neither does Hezbollah. Neither do the Israelis, but somehow it appears we're closer and closer to heading there. Israel wants daily attacks to stop. They've escalated things. Hezbollah wants to show Hamas support. That ceasefire ain't happening anytime soon. Iran wants to show that they're strong and that they can have revenge. Lebanon feels like they have no choice in the matter, but they also effectively host Hezbollah, and it's too late for them to figure out ways to take out Hezbollah in their own country, which uses it as a launching pad in Israel. So it's just a mess of a situation there. Speaking of Gaza, by the way, because Hezbollah says our things can continue while the war in Gaza continues, Hamas has reportedly rejected the latest U.S. draft offer over the weekend for a ceasefire deal. They now want to go back to the outline from May. Everything that was negotiated over the summer, they don't want to discuss anymore. The Wall Street Journal put out a story in recent days, Jill, that U.S. officials don't think any deal will happen in 2024 during the current president's term. They're now looking at next year, though they hold hope out. And one of the things they're frustrated by is that they feel like Hamas keeps requesting things for the deal, and then when they follow through on it, Hamas rejects it. And there are also people in the U.S. government who say that they still don't think Netanyahu on the Israeli side is that serious about a deal.
Now back here at home, we head to the West Coast via the Associated Press. Sidewalks once teeming with tents, tarps, and people passed out next to piles of trash have largely disappeared from major parts of San Francisco, a city widely known for its visible homeless population. The number of people sleeping outdoors dropped to under 3,000 in January. That's the lowest the city's recorded in a decade, according to a federal count. It was about 50% higher just before the pandemic. At the same time, homelessness in no way has gone away. It actually grew 7% to 8,300 in January, according to the same federal count. But the problem is now notably out of the public eye, raising the question of where people have gone and whether the change marks a turning point in a crisis long associated with San Francisco. And it comes as the mayor, London Breed, who's a progressive Democrat in a difficult re-election fight this November, started to ramp up enforcement of anti-camping laws in August following a U.S. Supreme Court decision.
Yeah, local and state officials there felt like their hands were tied based on local laws. And so the Supreme Court effectively gave them a green light here to do more. So where have these people gone? Well, San Francisco has increased the number of shelter beds and permanent supportive housing units by more than 50% over the course of the last few years. City officials are also on track to eclipse the nearly 500 sweeps of city sidewalks and parks that were conducted last year. The mayor's office there is also prioritizing bus tickets. They're giving one-way bus tickets to homeless people to leave the city. They're authorizing police to stamp out tents. Other California cities, by the way, also reporting this visible drop in homelessness. The beach city of Santa Cruz saw a 50% decline in the sleeping unsheltered this year. LA also recorded a 10% drop. And you see a lot of this behind the scenes. You might have read these stories in the past about California busing their homeless to Nevada, Nevada doing the same thing to California, Hawaii trying to give one-way flights to people to leave the state, to alleviate their homeless situation. When it comes to the numbers in this country, effectively, your leading states for the most amount of homeless are California, New York, Florida, and Washington. About 1/4 of all homeless in America live in California, despite the fact that California accounts for about 10% of the overall population. As far as seeing the largest percentage increases in homelessness lately, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Colorado, and New York have seen that. So this is a story we'll continue to monitor here. And so again here, while visibly you may see less homeless people on the streets, the issue continues to actually become a bigger issue when you look at the overall numbers.
From USA Today, if you're not quite ready to let go of summer, which officially ended Sunday, you might be in luck. The weather forecast for the U.S. for the months of October through December shows that warmer than average temperatures are likely for 46 out of 50 states. That is according to federal forecasters at the Climate Prediction Center. AccuWeather forecasters are also on board with the warm fall forecast.
All right, so lucky 46 states. Jill, 4 states are not included in the above average temperatures this fall. Out of luck here, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Washington State. So fair warning to you. So fair warning to those of you who live in those 4 states. It appears that you have an equal chance of a below average fall, while most of the country probably faces here an above average fall.
Only out of luck, though, if you want the warm weather. I love fall. I happen to like kind of that chilly when it starts to get a little chillier. I'm not saying I love winter, but fall is my favorite season.
Jill will be looking for Airbnbs in Wisconsin following this podcast. So one of the forecasters from AccuWeather, USA Today spoke to for the story, says that fall is going to feel like more of an extended summer for millions of Americans. There's going to be a delayed transition to the cooler temperatures that Jill likes. Areas where warmer than average temperatures are most likely include eastern New England, southern Florida, much of the Southwest, and this includes the Phoenix area. We've been telling you about Phoenix. They're still recovering from 113 record 100-degree days that it endured this summer.
It's the vest weather that I like, Moshe.
Yeah, you have vests and you need to wear them. And this is the time of year. And you, at some point, will get sick of 78-degree highs. I get it, Jill. Wisconsin and Minnesota listeners will provide you with a room.
All right, this next story from News Nation. The maker of the popular party game Cards Against Humanity is accusing Elon Musk's SpaceX of trespassing on and damaging a plot of vacant land the company owns in Texas. Yes, the party game owns land in Texas. We'll explain why in a second. So a lawsuit filed this week at a Texas court, Cards Against Humanity, alleges that SpaceX has essentially treated the game company's property located on the Texas-Mexico border as its own for at least the past 6 months. The lawsuit said SpaceX, which had previously acquired other plots of land near the property, has placed construction materials like gravel and other debris on the land without asking permission to do so. Cards Against Humanity is actually headquartered in Chicago, but it did purchase that plot of land in Texas back in 2017. Part of what it said was a stunt to oppose former President Trump's effort to build a border wall. We'll show him, Moshe.
So Cards Against Humanity bought some land in Texas to mess with Trump. And now Elon Musk and SpaceX are using that land. Apparently, SpaceX offered to buy the land that Cards Against Humanity owns at half of its value. And they responded with a lawsuit because they've also discovered that they're using this land for their own purposes here. Cards Against Humanity put out a statement. We promised we'd use every legal tool at our disposal to protect this land from bullies like Trump and Musk. If we don't take action now, why would anyone ever trust us again? I don't know how much trust I had for Cards Against Humanity and their politics here, Jill, but just one of those stories that reinforces to all of us that politics basically has invaded every part of our lives these days.
And finally, from Variety, West Wing creator Aaron Sorkin says he is now considering a revival of West Wing after a visit to the White House Friday to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the acclaimed NBC show. Sorkin telling Variety, I didn't think about it seriously, frankly, until today. We'll see what happens when I wake up tomorrow. But if you're asking me now, this is how I feel. Sorkin, director, executive producer Thomas Schlamme, and stars Martin Sheen, Richard Schiff, Dule Hill, Janelle Maloney, Melissa Fitzgerald, and Mary McCormick met with President Biden in the map room, and then they were given a personal tour of the building. Sorkin said that he has hesitated on a new edition of The West Wing in the past because he feared that audience would miss the original cast too much. He has said of Sheen and his character, I suspect that a new president would have a hard time living up to people's memories of Martin. That would be President Jed Bartlett. But he adds that maybe enough time has gone by and it is a whole new generation, a generation which, by the way, thanks to streaming, thinks we're making the show today. That is so funny.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's hard to track, like back in the day, Jill, we knew when new seasons started, reruns happened over the summer. And now with streaming, you have Suits, which I remember watching 15 years ago and on USA, people think that that's still a new show on streaming. There was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun watching, fake President Jed Bartlett, real President Joe Biden during the celebration at the White House. On Friday, they actually brought out a big block of cheese, which is featured in an episode, and did a lot of throwback things to the show, which I should say I was a huge fan of growing up, Jill. One of the reasons that young Moshe got really interested in politics and wanted to go learn about it more at college at GW in DC. So they've been doing a lot for the anniversary, the 25th anniversary here. They've had museum exhibits. You might have caught the Emmys last weekend where the cast got together and actually joked that plot lines that they thought about 25 years ago as unrealistic are now paling in comparison to what's happening in our real politics these days. And that actually is the nature of the issue here for Sorkin and the show. The show premiered back when Bill Clinton was president. It concluded during W's presidency. And Sorkin noted it's hard to create storylines for a revival of the show given the current political climate, given how just different it is these days. During the Trump era, one of his concerns is that everything they would do on the show would be seen through the modern lens as a rebuttal to the world of Trump and just modern politics here. We should note Aaron Sorkin has been engaged in some fantasy politics in recent months. We told you on this podcast about his essay over the summer when the Joe Biden thing was going down. He wrote a piece for the New York Times saying Democrats should nominate Mitt Romney as their candidate. Sorkin has since endorsed Harris, but we're like, you're going to endorse a Republican? They're like, in the world of West Wing, sort of fantasy, aspirational, inspirational politics world, that would make sense. So let's see here if Sorkin can come up with something. But that's something that mo.news, a fan of mo.news, Josh Malina, another West Wing alum and actor, he jokes about it all the time. He fakes people out on Twitter being like, new developments on the West Wing revival, and he gets people every single time. And so far, it's all been fake, but looks like it might be real soon. All right, let's end here with On This Day in History. We begin on this day in 1889. Nintendo was founded. Yes, not 1989.
What?
1889. The company originally produced and sold playing cards, like literal cards. And so for the first, 90 or so years of the company, Nintendo made playing cards. And then in 1981, they released a game called Donkey Kong. And so that arcade game brings Nintendo to the forefront of the electronic and video game era. So most of us only know Nintendo in its current iteration, but for like its first 100 years or so, playing cards, Jill. On this day in 1932, Saudi Arabia was founded. It was the merger of two kingdoms by Ibn Saud, the king of the House of Saud. And so today is Saudi National Day in the kingdom. On this day in 1952, there was a televised speech by then vice presidential candidate Richard Nixon. It was called the Checkers speech. He was accused of corruption, the use of campaign funds. He was running on Dwight Eisenhower's ticket at the time. It's called the Checkers speech because he received a dog named Checkers as a gift for his children. It was viewed as corrupt at the time. In the speech, he says he's keeping the dog. He kept Checkers. All right, we end here with a bit of pop culture. Movie and music history. On this day in 1969, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid had its world premiere. Many of you might have seen this film. It's a classic. Paul Newman, Robert Redford, a must-see from back in the day. And finally, Jill, it turns out September 23rd, a big day in music birth history. Like if you're born on September 23rd, you might be a future musical star. Today marks the birthdays of Ray Charles, Julio Iglesias, Ani DeFranco, and your fave, Bruce Springsteen. I went with Springsteen over Billy Joel is your fave.
I'm very okay with that, Moshe. But it is always interesting why certain dates or certain seasons or birth months produce people who excel in certain areas. I wonder, we got to put Malcolm Gladwell on this one. What is it about September 23rd? And musicians.
And we've talked about how, you might believe in astrology or not, but like a third of all newsrooms are Geminis, like you and me, like both of us. And ultimately, like journalism and communication is like if you're born between, May 21st and June 20th, like you have a fair chance of going into this business.
All right, everyone. That is a wrap on this Monday. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Might have to do with being oldest in the class, Jill. I don't know. But I mean, that'd be more kind of an academic thing than a music thing. But if you're September of the school year, you tend to be the old. Anyway, I'm going to take this offline because for the rest of you, you have to get on with your day.
You go down a rabbit hole, Moshe. Let us know what you find out.
The magic of September for musical talent.
All right. Bye, everyone.